Whether you're a self-taught musician, have a teacher, or you're already a professional, this show is meant to help you with knowledge, mindset, craft, and strategies to improve your overall musicianship so that you can become the best musician you can be, regardless of your goals. Welcome to Musicianship Mastery. Hello and welcome to Musicianship Mastery, episode number 109. My name is David Lane and it is great to be with you once again. This episode features a conversation that I'm very excited to share. First of all, because it's been a while in the making. This is a guest that I've tried to get on probably since maybe last summer. And for various reasons, it just hasn't worked out in our schedule to sit down, chat, and to record it. But we finally were able to do that a few weeks ago, and it is wonderful to be able to share this conversation with you now. Today I'm going to be talking with Michael Hall. He lives in Chicago, but he has an international career that he has crafted for himself. He is a champion of new music, especially new music of more marginalized composers. As a performer, he has given solo concerts and played with orchestras in the United States, Europe, and in Asia. He also is the artistic director of the Bandung Philharmonic in Indonesia. So we're going to talk about how he was able to craft this career and, why he chose the path that he did. Because I haven't mentioned one thing yet. I haven't mentioned what his instrument is. He's not doing this as a pianist or violinist or a cellist or something you might think when you first think of going around the world, especially as a featured artist with orchestras. He does this while playing the viola. And we talk about, his experience, his time playing in an orchestra and why he ultimately decided that that wasn't how he wanted to spend his career. Now, after this conversation, I'm hoping that you will feel inspired to go seek Michael out on social media. He's on all of the platforms, and we mentioned where you can find him at the end of this conversation. But the one thing that you would be able to find after looking at just a few of his posts that comes crystal clear on this interview, and I think you'll be able to hear it on audio, you'll definitely be able to see it if you're watching it on video, and that is his passion. How much he really loves what he does, and how much he really cares about the people he serves. As he says very early on, music for him is just a tool, a means for him to engage with his community. And he has some passion words about how you might be not living up to your potential if you're not engaging with your community as a musician. And we talk about a bunch of other things I haven't mentioned yet, but it's all, I believe, inspiring. It's all fun. And I hope you will enjoy listening to it as much as I enjoyed having this conversation. So without any further delay, here is my conversation with Michael Hall. Michael, it is great to finally talk to you in person. It seems like it's been several months since we have first talked about having you on Musicianship Mastery. It was the Musician Toolkit at the time, so a lot has happened since then. I know a lot has happened in your own life, but welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, David. It's an absolute joy to be here. I part of your whole podcast, like the whole zeitgeist of your podcast and the inclusiveness of your content. I was looking over your podcast series. I've been familiar with it, but just scanning through and for the first time taking notice of how varied your topics are and the type of people that you include on this podcast is commendable. It's kind of astonishing, actually. You're all over the place. And I think you're doing a great service to many musicians in the community. People, especially students who are in college, have, just so many questions and uncertainties, and as well as professionals. But I think you're really serving our community really well. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's a great compliment coming from you because I know that you are all about inclusion, and we're going to talk quite a bit about that. So first of all, we ought to talk about our at least our one small world connection, and that is that I live in the Piedmont Triad, and you used to go to school here. So you used to go to school in Greensboro. I live 20 minutes from Greensboro in High
Oh my.
Point, and I've been to your alma mater more than a few times, for various reasons, for conferences and also recitals and so forth. Even though I went to North Carolina School of the Arts in Winston-Salem, which is what brought me to the area. But you did your doctoral studies, I believe, at UNCG, if I'm not mistaken, or was it another degree?
No, you're correct. I went to University of North Carolina, Greensboro, specifically to study with the viola professors that they had there. And it was coming from Chicago, I didn't really know that region of the country at all very well.
Right.
Everybody has kind of like placeholders in our minds, mythologically set as to what different regions of the world are like. And North Carolina was still kind of caught in my mind as like Mayberry and Barney Fife and things. But I was absolutely floored by how much culture, how much activity, how much energy there is in that whole Piedmont triad between Winston-Salem, High Point, and Greensboro. And to an extent, they all kind of feed each other and create this big metropolis, which allows there to be what two major symphonies or decent sized symphonies, the Greensboro Symphony and the Winston-Salem Symphony, two major schools of art and music, the School of the Arts in Winston-Salem and UNC Greensboro, the flagship music school, or one of the two, right? And I now notice since I graduated that UNC School of the Arts and UNC Greensboro are all part of the same system. But
I believe, yeah.
it's an astonishing program, and I'm not paid to say this, but I
Right.
will just say I was floored by the magnitude of programs that were happening there and the quality. Because before that, I had gone to school at Ball State in Indiana for an undergraduate, and then I went to Cincinnati Conservatory for my master's. So I saw kind of like a medium-sized school, and then a huge conservatory, and then UNC Greensboro was kind of like an in-between, but just as active, it felt like, as UNC or CCM, Cincinnati.
Yeah.
It's astonishing. So
Yeah, and
I love
I
that
know
part
a
of the
lot of
country.
I know a lot of people who currently teach or are otherwise on staff at UNCG. And similar, when I went to North Carolina School of the Arts, I grew up in Florida,
Mm,
and I knew that at the time my goal was to be a film composer, and so I wanted to study that, but I wasn't ready to go to California. I didn't really think I could afford like the Berkeley School of Music. There weren't that many places, and someone just told me, "Have you looked into North Carolina School of the Arts?" And I was like, "Never even heard of it." Uh, and then my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, says, "Oh yeah, she went to a magnet school in Florida, for that was I think the high school was Gibbs, but it was like Pinellas County School of the Arts or something like that was her high school. She said so many people transferred from there to North Carolina School of the Arts. So it was a pretty good school. And then I did my research and found that it was in its finishing its first year of that program. And so I auditioned, was accepted, came up here, and thought I'd be here for just a few years and heading out to California, but life sometimes offers other plans, and
yes, it
after a
does.
while, you get that momentum and you just kind of stay. But we used to live north of Winston-Salem, and now we live in High Point, and it's really like it's like a small version of a big city. I'm within a mile of 25 restaurants. So actually, I think it's probably 23 or 24. We've had a couple close lately, but still plenty of amenities. And I can do probably about 75% of everything I want to do by walking and just going on foot. And I really miss that and living in other areas.
That's something we cherish here in Chicago. But you are right, being able to walk everywhere. I live in the Hyde Park community
Mhm.
of the city of Chicago, which is just off of Lakeshore Drive by the University of Chicago. Most people, if they know Chicago, they might know the Museum of Science and Industry, and that's within walking distance of my home.
I
But
have to point out my favorite restaurant was near University of Chicago. I went up there in 2018. Noodles, etc., I think is what it was
oh,
called. Yep.
yes, Yes, my wife and I have been there many, many times. Still
Yeah.
there, doing
And
well.
was it is it Jackson Park? There's a park nearby. It has a museum, but also has a lake and a lot of,
Hmm.
botanical areas. I really enjoyed that
That's
section.
it. All of that was the former site of the 1893 World's Fair.
Oh yeah,
So, yeah, so that big layout, it's they kept it open. And as you know, Chicago's famous for that lakefront and for having all the green space. Uh,
hmm
it's nice. We landed, like you were saying, you never know where you're going to land. And we were fortunate to land here. And we didn't think we would be returning and staying to Chicago very long. But
right.
just, things, opportunities, investment in the community occurs, friendships develop, and you find yourself becoming part of the community, which is a joy.
Well, last thing before we move on, but you mentioned the impression of North Carolina as being like Mayberry. Did you ever get up to Mount Airy? Because that really is Mayberry.
We drove through it every single time we went back and forth to Chicago.
Right.
Yeah. And I think my wife and I even were there for the Mayberry days,
Oh,
and we
nice.
saw the guy dressing up as Barney Fife and driving the car. Um, I mean, it's a wonderful kind of community like landmark and
Right.
everything. But North Carolina is so much more than that. You
Were
know,
you even
it's
aware? Yeah, I mean, you probably were, but Andy Griffith, the real life actor, he studied voice at North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and there's when he passed away, there were
oh,
posts about like his senior voice recital, and it was Italian aria mixed with some musical theater, and it was, and I was told he had a very lovely singing voice, but I think he was maybe a theater major there, but he had an emphasis in voice. It was very interesting.
well, I knew he was a good singer because
Hmm
sometimes he would sing on the show and play guitar, but I didn't know that he studied formally at UNC Chapel Hill. Wow,
Yeah.
I shouldn't be surprised.
Ah, there's so many places we can go from here. You have had a very diverse career, and I was just going to read off just some of the things that I pulled off of, your About Me section online, which is that you were the adjunct faculty at Illinois Wesleyan University 2003 to 2012. You were assistant principal section viola and advisory board for I believe was the Chicago Philharmonic
Hmm.
Orchestra in 2000 to 2014. You coached chamber music for the Chicago Youth Symphony Orchestras 2013 and 2014. You were an instructor at Chicago Academy of the Arts 2000 2015. Um, and I want to pause there before we go on. So what I see so far is, I guess maybe the first 15, 20 years of your career is you trying to find yourself. It's like you're playing in an orchestra, you're working with orchestral musicians and so forth. And you're also a teacher. And then it looks like about this point, if I'm seeing this correctly, somewhere around 2009 is when I see a transition to what you've kind of done since then. You were a featured performer at the Thailand International Composition Festival, where you premiered 47 pieces between 2009 and 2017. And
Oh my gosh, that sounds
you,
crazy.
right. And then in the midst of that, you were the Chicago College of Performing Arts Composition Studio Musician in Residence 2016 to 2017. So, um, and that's just kind of what you've done in the past. I'll get to your recent jobs in a moment so we can talk more about them. But
I'm getting
like
tired
you
listening
have,
to it. You're making me sound like so active. It's like,
oh,
oh my gosh, the
well,
energy.
it sounds like you've done a lot of, you know, making a living, getting some work, but also kind of discovering maybe what your passions were. So, I definitely want to find out more about where your passions were. But you have
Hmm.
if I'm not mistaken, you play an instrument. So you play viola. I will have said that in the introduction. Uh, that normally when people choose that instrument, they're thinking, I've got to find an orchestra that I enjoy playing in and let that be the main thing, and then maybe supplement that with by being a professor or teaching lessons. And that's probably I mean, hate to stereotype it, that's probably 90% of the violists that I've met that decide to do that. In
Right?
your current things, um, I don't see you playing, regularly in an orchestra, but you have taken some passions. It looks like you've developed a passion internationally, but especially for Asia, for Southeast Asia is where I'm kind of seeing, and also representing composers that are not regularly performed and encouraging new music, especially for the viola. Would you say that's kind of where you are now?
Yes. Um, yes. A lot of this goes back to even earlier where um, I, I kept looking at orchestra musicians, and I have deep respect for people, for musicians who play their whole life. It's harder to get into like one of those major orchestras than it is to get into the major leagues in baseball or the NFL or NBA. I mean, and the number of people graduating that are qualified to play in those positions each year is astonishing.
Mhm.
So, major kudos to that. I, for myself, I found it very kind of like this whole dichotomy. Like you're training yourself as a violist, I thought I saw, and you're playing wonderful parts, accompaniment at some moments, and then like for 5 seconds, you're playing the melodic material that forces the modulation or the cathartic emotional impact as your five notes out of the entire symphony. And it was wonderful, but most of the time when I play an orchestra, I actually had a hard time hearing myself. Um, I also, and so that would wreak havoc with my technique and my tone and all of these things we spent years developing. And then also the aspect of, you know, you spend so much time sitting, not communicating verbally or emotionally with your stand partner or a person across the room. I'm a social person, and I love investing all of this time into music so it can actually communicate with people or make an impact on their life. And there's like this feedback loop that is resultant from that. I feel better when I do that. And hopefully there's the energy of receiving music or whatever social programs are happening in the community or activities. So early on, I felt the need to kind of like use music as not the service or like the main part of my life, but music was the vehicle which I could help do things in the community and try to be a more rounded person myself. One day I was talking to a very uh, accomplished neighbor, and they made the comment, "Oh, you're just a musician. You don't know about such things." And he didn't mean it to be a slight. He didn't mean it to be an offensive comment, but it made me think I didn't want to spend my whole life being a vocationalist.
Mhm.
And so, you know, I read voraciously now. All the novels that while I was practicing 7, 8, 10 hours a day in college and going to class that I missed out. I hike like crazy when I get out into the mountains or anything. I've had over 3,500 miles hiking in mountains and just experiencing the world, travel. So music has been like the conduit for meeting people, expanding my awareness for what it is that I don't know. And I don't mean just musically, but socially, politically, um, and just the engagement of humanity. Because we talk about this all the time as people who are proselytizing to young students, like classical music will change your life. Any music will change your life and empower you. But I saw a disconnect that when I was hanging around um, certain organizations where it felt like you're only coming to work and you do your work and you go home. And there was maybe not a lot of happiness. There was maybe a lot of disconnect between them and the society. Elitism just drives me nuts, and I try as much as I can to throw it out the window or dispel it or erase it from the
Mhm.
arts. But that's a very uphill battle, yeah. And so that disconnect between you're actually having a wide input of material and experiences in your life and knowledge, but you're also a great musician is something that is kind of for me one of those. that's one of the end all things. If you can actually use music to expand and become more instead of just being a musician, if that makes sense.
Right.
Um,
You talk about elitism. Uh, does it even surprise you anymore that before, just you can know that before a Super Bowl game is played, there's going to be all this elitist outrage over the halftime show from people who don't like that kind of music. You just kind of expect it now, I think.
and it comes from many different sources. It comes from those who have their views, who are not musicians, right? And they only like this kind of music. They only like country music, or they only like metal, or they only like bagpipe music, or whatever, didgeridoo. Um, but then, trained, experienced musicians who are striving to expand their knowledge and their students' knowledge of what music is and what it can become, to have that kind of vocal barbs coming from individuals that are in that school of thought. Some, not a lot, but some.
Right.
It weighs, and that's hard. And don't know if they realize what kind of impact that has on their students. Um,
Yeah.
because what Kendrick is doing is magical, and there's not a composer alive who doesn't envy the success rate, the awareness that the population, that the world has about him and his music.
Mhm.
He's getting his message out there. And what more is a composer about? Whatever
Yes.
vehicle or style, it's getting your message out. And Kendrick resonates, and he does it with both incredible intelligence and emotional impact, as well as just structurally what he's doing with his music. I mean, it's just astonishing. So
Yeah.
that's
And
everything you say.
I think you don't even have to understand something, or be the intended audience to have a respect for what other people are doing artistically.
That because
Yeah.
that's where elitism comes. It's okay to admit that you don't know something. I mean, it is true, right? The more we know, the more we realize what we don't know. And we run the risk of stepping into a lot of piles of you know what ourselves if we don't recognize that. There was a great image one of my main mentors in music taught me. She said, think of your knowledge that you have in life as a balloon. Okay, for some reason, it's always a red balloon to me, but just go with me. Choose a favorite color as you'd like. But everything you know is in that balloon. Everything you are aware that you don't know is the exterior surface of the balloon, what you're aware of that you don't know. So as you fill up that balloon with more knowledge, yes, you know more, but the surface area of what you become aware of that you don't know expands just as much, if not maybe more, right? So that kind of awareness, I think, is important for all of us, and that helps keep me hopefully from falling into any feelings like I'm better than because I do this, or that person is better because they're engaging with this tradition versus that. So it's
Yeah.
challenging. I mean,
Yeah.
there's just so
I-
much great stuff in the world. Why take some time to complain about what you think is not great? Discover all the great stuff. Be open.
Exactly. Yeah. And that is true. It's like I kind of I I cringe a little bit when I think about how arrogant I was when I was in my teenage years and in my early 20s. It's like just kind of how much I thought I knew and how sure I was about things, but I'm realize I'm not alone when it comes to that age group.
Uh,
Unfortunately, it's not as common as I would hope that everyone will grow out of that. But thankfully, I was able to, and I'm sure I still have some tendencies. It's hard to um, not react certain ways if I don't like something, but I can also have the presence of mind to step back, not post about it, and give some further reflection so that I can maybe have a more nuanced opinion about something. And I appreciate that. That's kind of where I see you coming from as well.
striving towards it because we all
Yeah,
have our moments, and humans are humans. I mean, to forget that is another trap, I think. So none of us are really better than. We're all on just different journeys. So
Right.
now I'm sounding too new agey. I apologize.
Oh no. Let's talk about looks like you have about three aspects of your career right now, and let's just kind of go into maybe just a little bit of explanation of each. Let's start with New Music Shelf. You are the curator of that. What is New Music Shelf? And yeah, just what is it you do there? What led to that?
Well, New Music Self is a venture that's really led by um, Dennis Tabensky. He's the publisher in New York City of this entire collection of anthologies. Okay, so he recognized that, we're a quarter of the way through the 21st century, and we're still calling, 20th century music new music. And it wasn't to fight that battle of labels. It was just to say, hey, look, we're a quarter of the way through this. We need to try to get some of the pieces that are outstanding for each instrument and voice out there to performers, to teachers, so they don't, kind of sit there in the cosmic background, not being identified. And he decided that as places to start to introduce teachers and performers, as well as students, to the repertoire of this century, he embarked on this idea of each instrument and each voice would have an anthology of its own, a bound edition. And so I was asked by Dennis to curate the viola edition.
Mm.
We did a call for scores, over 240 scores, composers sent in free submissions, and I had all of that to choose from. And I selected 20 of those pieces to go into this collection. Dennis engraved everything so they're all uniform, just an absolute Herculean engagement, because they're pieces for solo viola as well as viola and piano. So the number of pages involved is just enormous for editing, but he did a beautiful job. And this one will be coming out in the next couple of months. It's not yet hit the public, so it's very soon. But I made a purposeful attempt to try to get pieces involved from composers that were from around the world. First, they had to make the instrument look good.
Mhm.
Um, because if it doesn't, the player is not going to want to further investigate 21st century music or new music, whatever we
Right.
wish to call it right now. Music by living composers.
Right.
So it had to make the instrument look good, feel good to engage with. Then, if it met that qualification and it was a great piece, then I looked and I was trying to find pieces from all around the world, not just American, or worse, not just Chicagoan, right? It's so easy to favor just your own little fair or neighborhood, but or just Europe. So I have pieces from Southeast Asia, pieces from Europe. There are pieces from all over the United States and Brazil, and they're just kind of, it's a joy to do this because it's kind of almost like where's the state of composition at right now in the world? And it looks kind of like this. It'll not be a binder. This is the rough edit. It'll actually be
Right.
a bound book, and there will be a solo viola version for with all of the solo parts, and then a piano version. And it's going to be like 20 or $30. I'm sorry, I'm sounding like a commercial, but I'm
Oh,
saying that because this could be easily, 8,900, $120 for 20 pieces. But
right.
Dennis wants to make certain that everything is low price point to get students and teachers just to bite, to engage, and also then to get a lot of sales because all of the sales go directly to the composers.
Right. Oh, I mean, that's not unreasonable. I mean, 20 years ago, I paid like $25 for piano sheet music, that's, about 80, 90 pages, that was, more recent,
Mhm.
music, obviously with some more current composers as well. So, yeah. Um, but that's again, kind of keeping with the theme, I love that you are really trying to encourage composers of all over the places. I mean, I grew up, well, I mean, I grew up loving film music, but when I got into classical music, it's kind of the traditional Western European track with occasional, American composers, mostly male. and mostly white that I kind of learned to enjoy. But it's been a joy to discover music from all over the place. Some, Asian composers. There's also been some like Icelandic composers I've really enjoyed as well. Um, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce like their names because because I don't have a pronunciation guide. But yeah,
A lot of
I've
syllables.
discovered, yeah, a lot of syllables. But yeah, it's like there's a Icelandic woman composer that I'm thinking of. I know Anna's her first name, starts with a TH, her last name,
Mhm.
and like a lot of letters after that. I may try to like type put it on the YouTube. I'll type it out and I'll show right here what that is. When I put the edits together on this. But um, yeah, it's great to just see what else is out there if all you've been limited to is a certain version of classical music. And so I appreciate that you do that. Now, speaking of new classical music, you are also a concerto and recitalist. You specialize in new music, and you've had a career in U.S., Europe, and Southeast Asia. What what's the origin of that? Like, what was your first opportunity um, to start doing this very thing?
Well, as a viola player, most of our repertoire that is really our strongest repertoire, emotionally, technically, and makes the instrument really look good, again, that you really want to engage with, is 20th century forward. There are
Mhm.
wonderful examples beforehand, and there's honestly hundreds of pieces before 1900, some of greater and lesser quality. And there's not as few pieces as people like to, mythologically state. There's actually quite a lot out there.
Mhm.
It's just, again, the trappings of which composers are you really kind of pushing. If you're only thinking of Beethoven, Brahms, and Bach, of course, you're going to say, well, there's not much viola repertoire, but there's tons of stuff by classical composers out there and romantic. They're just on lists that people usually don't file through on the library as deeply. Um, which I
Is
always,
Harold in Italy like the most famous one from the 19th century, I think, or
um, it's hard to, famous, it's hard to say. I would say that it's not frequently performed or
oh, okay.
programmed. One, because it's just, well, it's not programmed very often, but two, it's almost never taught. I didn't
Hmm.
experience it until I was a professional and I was asked to perform it. And the main reason for that is only the first movement has a virtuosic display of sustained duration. And if you're doing a degree pattern or degree and required recitals, you have to have a program that's demonstrating your whole strength. So you're not going to program a piece that's 45, 50 minutes long, and only the first 8, 9 minutes of that piece are this extroverted display, and everything else you might be setting for 50, 60, 80 measures of rest until you got an obligato gesture or you come back in with the ED fix theme.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so that piece suffers. Some of the other pieces that suffer is the Alfred Schnittke Viola Concerto, amazing, but there's no first violins or no violins in the orchestration. So a conductor is not really, they're not really excited about getting rid of their violin section from the orchestra very often. Hindemith's Trauer music, or I'm sorry, Svanendreher, one of the big, quote, three viola concertos that every violist learns for an orchestra audition, especially here in the States, Bartok, Walton, and Hindemith Char music. But the Hindemith does not have any violins in it either. So those are two strong reasons, or rather, that's a strong reason why you don't hear those two pieces performed very often, unfortunately. They're strong, they're great. But, a conductor without violins, that's something that they don't envision very often on their stage. Um,
Right.
but early on, if you're looking back, there's the Brahms sonatas, of course. Schumann wrote an incredible collection of four pieces for us, character pieces, each one. Just absolutely virtuosic. I highly recommend looking up. It's called Märchenbilder, which means fairy tale pictures, viola and piano. And Hummel, I know he's not like, people don't think of him as an A-list composer. And that's the problem. We get a lot of B and C composers of that era, so people don't even think about them anymore, or enough. But the
Right.
Hummel fantasy for viola and orchestra is really quite astonishing and virtuosic. And it's a lot of pyrotechnics. Max Bruch wrote a double concerto for viola and clarinet. as well as a piece, a romance for viola and orchestra. Neither of those get performed enough, but that's,
I do know the Max Bruch pieces are very nice, and my wife really loves them. I haven't really said, but she plays viola. She
um,
was trained as a violinist, and she took up viola because she doesn't really care for like first violin parts. She doesn't want, she will volunteer to do, if second is needed or viola, is what her preference is. But she loves the Bruch, and just Hummel's an interesting composer to bring out if people were trying to find somebody new in the classical world because he has a very good trumpet concerto. He has the viola uh,
yeah.
concerto you just mentioned. He also has what is might be regarded as the bassoon concerto to learn. It's like I've talked to multiple bassoonists, and his bassoon concerto is like right up there with like the creme de la creme of what you're supposed to learn in that instrument from that era.
Yeah, yeah. All bassoonists. My wife is a bassoonist actually in a former life. So yeah, the Mozart bassoon concerto, the Hummel, those two are like if you're going to hear a bassoonist, those are the first two pieces conductors will ask them to play.
Right.
They're good pieces, and they're fun and they make the instrument look great. They're up and down the instruments, high octane energy. So
Good. So,
who's
what
to
led to
call
your
that?
opportunities to present these concertos? I mean, I'm also, I guess, I'm kind of asking is like, what did you do to put yourself out there as
Oh,
a soloist to orchestras?
thank you for pulling us back. I got us into the weeds there. So the reason I brought all that up earlier was because, I was already being introduced to newer music or music by composers that were still living. I was playing the Rockberg Sonata when he was still alive, um, and a bunch of other pieces that, you know, mid 20th century are like the staple of the viola, the Alfred or the Sostakovich Sonata, the Alan Shulman theme and variations for viola and orchestra, which is a piece, if you don't know it, oh my gosh, it's almost like the Rococo variations for cello and orchestra, but it's different language, but kind of American folky and more of the middle 20th century. And so, in other words, I was already thinking like it's not unique. This is our wheelhouse. These composers are writing for us and they're eager. They're putting out their energy and time and creative endeavors to write for us. So that was the first kind of like door to be open for me. The next one was the fact that each one of the schools I went to had an incredibly active composition faculty and a very friendly student composition collection. So collaborating with the already in-house composers was like natural. I wanted to talk to them. They were the only ones that would actually say, "Hey, Michael, you're working on that George Rockberg sonata. Let's use that in the theory class." Instead of just using the well-tempered clavier again. Great piece, but let's do something else as well. Or the Barrio Natural for viola and percussion and recorded Sicilian folk singer. Let's do a whole theory section on that. So that new music was alive. And that really it was a gift to me because I don't like thinking of music as a museum edifice, something that has to be preserved. I like the fact that for me and for many people, music is a living art that is constantly changing. And when I'm picking up a sonata or a concerto by Jennifer Higdon, Samuel Adler, or any new composer that's out there in Europe and Asia, that Chen Yi, for instance, Stacy Garrett, that kind of makes my Brahms better. That makes my Mozart better, and vice versa. There's no wall. There's no definition to me, defining wall between those two. Yes, they're different eras, but man, when I go to the Art Institute of Chicago, I'm
Hmm.
walking between Impressionism to Cubism, and then, oh, here's the Renaissance. I love it all. And each one of them has such a great, distinct um, collection of features that make it radiate why that's important to humanity. And each era of music does too. So having composers present in front of me while I was a student was important. Having the repertoire already like in my face that I had to engage with every week, and my teachers knowing some of these composers, like the LaSalle String Quartet. I mean, they worked with um, Otto Luning. They worked with Penderecki. They had, like in the LaSalle String Quartet, they had pieces written for them. Lutoslawski wrote a string quartet for my teachers. And that made this direct connection by me hearing the firsthand accounts of Peter Kamnitzer, the violist of the LaSalle String Quartet, working with Lutoslawski. Then it was not a great step for me to say, oh, what would an experience have been like for me to talk with Bach or me to talk with Mozart? Instead of being these entities that were deities, they became human beings with thoughts and that you could, wish to talk to. Instead of just relying upon an expert on that music, right? You only play Bach this way. That'd be weird. Like you only play Jennifer Higdon this way. Could you imagine that?
Right.
Right?
So how
So
did you connect with orchestras to become the soloist and get these opportunities to play these pieces?
I try to let it be as organic as possible. I am a kind of person I work and I help a refugee center in Indonesia, and I've done a lot of community programs for music and creating programs in the south side of Chicago that I created through this Young Composers program using Howard Gardner concepts. I'm totally comfortable advocating and working like crazy verbally and meeting wise for on the behalf of others. For myself, I'm not as comfortable doing that. So I'm not the kind of person that's sending out 40 emails to conductors like every day. You must program this, hey, 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 knocking on the door like that. It's always my favorite musical experiences have been the ones that, yes, I was invited to a festival because a friend heard me practicing a piece. So they said, hey, why don't you come? And by the way, three other composers will write you a piece at the festival. And then the conductor that's there, we're talking, we're having food, we're relaxing. It's organic. And that human relationship is established first. And then the music, the performance, the being asked to perform becomes a celebration of that friendship instead of a business transaction. And I'm not taking away, please, all of those who work very hard to send those emails out and the promotional package. I have deep admiration and respect for you because it does work.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I just know that that's not my personality type. And I'm a father of two, and I'm usually sleep deprived, and because I'm always up late with Zoom meetings. So my RAM, my short-term memory is not great. So to remember how to keep up with all of those emails and everything and all of those relationships, that's a struggle for me. It's not my forte. So it's always based on organic relationships. Each one of those performances that I've given of a concerto performance, new or older pieces, whether it's the Mozart Sinfonia Concertante, a friend asked me to do that, that I'd known years before, or the Brook romance that I talked about, a friend told a friend kind of thing. So, or Chen Yi and Stacy Garrett, all of those have developed from friendships.
Great. Let's pivot. Let's talk about just the last leg that I have, at least that I know of your professional career, and that is you're the artistic director of is it the Bandung Philharmonic? Am I
Mhm.
saying it right? In
You are.
Indonesia?
Yeah, Bandung Philharmonic in Indonesia. It's a
So
small town.
how did the opportunity come about, and tell us just a little bit about what you do there?
That is a completely, again, friends. A conductor, Robert Nordling, who ended up being the conductor. We jointly were in this with Irene Efren, who was a former student of his, and we got together this idea of forming an orchestra because all of the musicians there they will study and travel to Europe or the Central Conservatory in China in Beijing, or they'll go to Mahidal, which is one of the like top 5 schools of music in the world now. It's in Bangkok, or the Youngsuto Conservatory in Singapore. Major institutions in the world, on par with the Freiburg Hochschule and Paris Conservatory and London School. But they come back to Indonesia and they have nothing to do. So we kind of quipped about starting an orchestra and it took off. That was in July or June rather of 2015. And after like a whole slew of emails and oh my gosh, the communications and the logistics, where are we going to play? How are we going to find the musicians? Uh, we had to develop so many things. For instance, 6 months later, I flew there and we had the very first blind auditions in the country's history. We had
Mm.
women auditioning. We had contracts, which nobody had done contracts before, let alone it's a whole year span. You know exactly where you're going to sit, all the repertoire a whole year ahead of time. We take that for granted in the States, but that had never existed there. And all of the repertoire was new to them, meaning not only was like the Beethoven Fifth Symphony or the Mendelssohn Four or the Debussy Prelude to the Afternoon of the Faun, the first time it was being played in Indonesia at that time. But also each concert we commissioned and premiered a new piece by an Indonesian composer, which was vital because we wanted to make this a 21st century arts organization and not a 19th century arts organization. We're here in the 21st century. And, why would I want to recreate the Berlin Philharmonic there? While Berlin Philharmonic is great, the community of Bandung, which is 9 million people, it's 3 times the size of Chicago,
Mhm.
um, has a musical heritage expanding, going back thousands of years.
Yeah.
Why ignore that?
Hmm.
Why drop in like a parachuting set of dudes here from the States and say, classical music, just this means only this. So we wanted to, and are still striving to develop a whole catalog of repertoire of Indonesian composers writing for symphonic ensembles. And that symphonic ensemble is adaptable. Sometimes it will have a gamelan or an angklung or kacapi or sulings. So taking advantage, no, utilizing the gifts of the community. I like that actually far more because then those members of the community are seeing that Western music and Eastern music. No, let's take away. The classical music is not defined by East and West, that it's defined by just the fact that we're all sitting in this room enjoying it together, and that it may speak of something poignant, it may speak of something frivolous, but there's a large group of musicians on that stage, they're representing your community and they're going to bring a lot of different voices. And that was easy to do, new music there, because for the audience, Mendelssohn 4 was a first time listening experience. Debussy was a first time listening experience, just as Nabuto Gori or Aria Kiti, So it was not even new music. It's just like, here is the music right now coming at us from this concert stage, which is beautiful.
Excellent. Here's a two-part question about that. Um, answer in any order as you want. I would love to know, like, so looking at your calendar year, how often are you going over there? And for the benefit of those who haven't seen your posts on the subject, enlighten us to the path the airplane takes to get there, because I think it might not be what people think.
Yeah, when you think of Indonesia, well, if you think of Indonesia, because most Americans may not know where it's at,
Right.
it's almost an exact dipode from where we are, meaning the exact opposite of the Earth. If you were to draw a straight line going straight down, you would come out in the middle of the Indian Ocean, 90 miles past where I'm going. So
Mm.
this is as far on land as I'll ever get, or could, before I go past that 90 miles and I'm already coming home, further than the South Pole, further than Australia. And so I assumed because it was south of the equator and, oh, here, we're here in North America and
Yeah.
Indonesia is way down over here.
Yeah.
I assumed, something that would happen like this, but no, we actually took off and I noticed, oh, we're really following Lake Michigan the whole way. And I said, oh, there's Green Bay. And then we went over Hudson Bay, and I'm looking on the map on the headset or the seat behind us. We go directly over the North Pole, and then we cut through the very center of Russia, go over Ulaanbaatar of
Hmm.
Mongolia, the center of China, and land in Hong Kong. That's 15 hours. And
Wow.
then it's another multiple hour trip and flight just to fly from Hong Kong straight down to Jakarta, which is just a massive city, 33 million people there,
Well,
just four times the
yeah,
size of
you
New
you
York.
said that the first time you said that, I was like, well, that's strange. And it sent me to Google just to ask about flying over the North Pole to get, and yeah, and there was a bunch of posts that talked about how common it was and how it actually saves fuel to do it that way instead of trying to make it all the way across the Pacific, which is, people think the Pacific is big, but it's actually bigger than you think.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's over a third of the planet. So yeah, it's it's enormous, yes.
So
But
how often do you have to go there?
before the pandemic, I was going there a lot.
Hmm.
And since the pandemic has kind of, well, if it would not declared end, whatever phase we're in right now, it has not been as often. And that is because of a couple of things. Well, before I was going like 4 or 5 times a year, and I would be there for 2 to 4 weeks at a time. Okay. Now it's only maybe 2 times a year, and it's because of a combination of factors. We are living in a changing world. It's
Hmm.
always changing, but right now it's not to the advantage for most of us, it feels like, in terms of travel and engaging internationally. So, and I should also state that from the very beginning, the intention of being involved with the orchestra was to help get things going, and eventually I would be removed from this because they wouldn't need me anymore, right?
Hmm.
In other words, this is not my gravy train until I ride off into the sunset. No, the exact opposite. It's about empowering others to lead in their own community. So the fact that it's actually become fewer and fewer trips is part of the original plan, even though it's accelerated a little bit from where we intended initially. But it's a factor of, yes, that I'm not needed as much. The infrastructure for what we're doing is in place. We still have the conducting fellowship going, the first time that's happened. We still have composer in residence, the first female composer in residence in Southeast Asia. We still have the young composers competition. We still have the young concerto competition, blah, blah, blah. All of this and the education programs helping thousands of students and coordinating also within a refugee center in Asia or in Indonesia. All of that is still going. So the hard work of getting it going and creating a program that's going to be sustainable, that's done. Now it is sustaining, or more importantly, adapting to the needs of the community as it goes along, right? Um, so I'm not as necessary, and I shouldn't be as necessary to get it going, because there are wonderful people there. Now, I'm still going every once in a while because it's like development. This whole orchestra is privately funded. There's no state funding whatsoever. And there's no tax benefit to donating in Indonesia. So
Hmm.
there's no tax deduction. It's all altruistic, believing in the mission and giving to the community. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, that's a different sell than here in the States, I will tell you. And
Wow.
it's been a steep learning curve, but it's worked out really well. There's a team of people there that are just astonishing. And let me say that again. This would not be possible, any of it, without an incredible army of people involved with this. Um,
Hmm.
because it was like hiring PR people, hiring admin, hiring, trying to like teach individuals what a board does and exists, an auxiliary board as well, stage crew, personnel individuals. I mean, all of this was first for everybody, and also teaching the community to be um, philanthropic for such
Hmm.
an endeavor. There was also that aspect to it. So I learned a great deal about how to just get your feet, not just dipping your toe in, but we were up to here, and how do you start from absolute scratch?
Right.
And the fact that it happened in 6 months just still kind of makes my head spin with amazement. I have no idea, other than just the fantastic people that were on the ground.
Well, that's excellent. What is one tip? It could be practice or it could be for your career. What is a tip you would offer the listeners who are music students today?
You will not have seen what your best option is until you just weigh and keep your options open. Meaning, I had no idea I would be helping to guide and lead uh, a refugee center in Indonesia and working with the UN and the immigration department in Indonesia and things like this. I had no idea that I would have to know so much about contracts. You will have to understand that being a musician is really trying to make yourself indispensable to your community. I think that if there's one piece of information, that's going to have different roles for each person in each community. But quite frankly, if your neighbor doesn't know that you're a musician or that you have a show, that's maybe you should readdress your communication outlets and how often you're letting people where you don't want to get into these silos. And worst of all, you don't want to get into your mind of what you think the mythology of being a musician is. It's no longer just practicing, winning an audition, and getting out there. Yes, those orchestra jobs are out there, but for a vast majority, like you and I talked about earlier, there are so many highly qualified individuals out there graduating from schools of music, trained artists that will not win that audition that is a salary that is life sustaining by itself. So that does not mean that your options are over. Create them. Don't wait for that email. Don't wait for that phone call. Create options. Talk to your alderman, talk to the people on the city staff, talk about grants, create chamber music programs, create schools of music, create programs in the schools, create a concert series in the library, create programs that go into children's homes, into hospitals, into hospices. And honestly, you can create a whole round robin of situations, you know and not just teaching at a university at a tenure position and not just a full-time orchestra job. So many things. And find the thing that resonates for you. You have to believe in it first because it's not just a good opportunity that succeeds, it's a good opportunity that you're passionate about. And without that passion, people can smell whether you're sincere or not in an endeavor. Um,
Yeah.
Trust me. So people
Well,
have won me over many times with crazy ideas just because of their passion for it.
that's an excellent answer, excellent advice. So I know you were omnipresent on social media. In fact, you were talking about reading earlier. I was really pleased
Oh,
when we connected on Goodreads, and uh, I I was pleased to see someone else who had read and enjoyed, um, the Three Body Problem series
mm.
before there was a Netflix show about it. So, I didn't see too many people who knew about it, but I had read it and loved it, and I saw that you did. And it looks like we both have kind of a fondness for science fiction. That's kind of like well thought out science fiction, and we like some of the other same books, and that's good to see. And but for those who want to connect with you, you were on all the social media platforms. Just tell people where they can
Many.
follow you, whatever you'd like.
Well, basically, the easiest thing to do would be on whatever your favorite social media platform of choice is. Look up my name, Michael Hall Viola.
Yeah,
Uh, if you use that combination, you'll find me on Instagram, on Facebook, and I'm on X still a little bit. It's
yeah,
kind of, you know, it's kind of just know thy enemy a little bit, or at least know what else is also being said. I'm not going to
right.
abandon it because I feel like if I do that, then I'm further siloing myself too. But that's another political comment. Sorry, but
No, no,
all
it's
of
fun.
those one,
And actually, it's kind of ironic. That is where I believe we first connected was
it
on that
is.
platform.
It is
Yeah,
a lot of collaborations were first formed on X, Twitter. I
yeah,
like, yeah, still Twitter. Back in like 2014 through 2019, there were
yeah,
so many. It was a completely different feel at that time. The
right.
the exchange of ideas that were helping, seeking to nurture one another was just through the roof.
Yeah.
It was astonishing. And I would be lying if I didn't say I missed that. That
Oh yeah,
community was quite astonishing. Um, but if you're looking for me, Michael Hall Viola, also on YouTube. I have, I think, 47 or 48 videos up there. Most of it is pieces that are written for me. So,
excellent. Well, it was worth the wait, and I'm glad we were able to have this conversation finally. So, thank you so much for joining me today.
David, thank you. It's meant a lot. And yes, you viewers, David has been asking me for a long, long time. And through my own like extreme schedules, and also just like you alluded to earlier, there were health issues and concerns within my family. And things are much better now. Thank you.
That's great to hear.
But there were other things kind of grabbing my attention. And your persistence and patience, more importantly, with me is deeply appreciated. So thank you, David. If anybody has any questions, please, I don't know if you do this ever, David, but if anybody has questions as a result of our conversation, whether it's commissioning or as individuals out there are saying, hey, what composers are there from Indonesia or Thailand or Malaysia or Cambodia or in Europe? Because I'm shocked still about how few living composers in Asia and Europe that Americans are aware of right now too. If you would like some names so you can explore repertoire for your own instrument, viola or not, I'd be happy to help. Or if you're traveling to Indonesia soon, I'd be happy to give advice or some suggestions if you have nowhere to start. So it's a magical place, a magical place.
Excellent. Well, thank you once again.
Thank you, David.
And that's going to wrap up today's episode. If you have any thoughts after hearing this episode that you'd like to share with your own voice, you can do that at speakpipe.com. That's speakpipe.com/musician toolkit. But you can also go to my website at davidlanemusic.com, fill out the contact form, and send me your thoughts. And also, if you just want to be at a future mailing list that I'll probably be getting around to, in about a month from now, I'll start sending out things to those who are interested. Feel free in the meantime to just go ahead and just fill out your name, put subscribe in the subject, and I will take care of the rest. Feel free to follow me on Instagram or TikTok at David Lane Music, or on Facebook at David M. Lane Music. And if you are watching on YouTube, thank you. Please click the thumbs up on this video, and please subscribe if you haven't already. And if you're listening on a podcast and it's been a while since you've left a 5-star rating or review, or if you've never done so, and you're listening especially on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, that would be much appreciated. Any little thing to help us find people who would be interested in this podcast that haven't found it yet. Once again, that's going to wrap up today's episode, but I'll be back with you again next week. Until then, thank you so much for listening.